Welcome to Rhythms of Faith. Thanks for joining us today on the Rhythms of Faith podcast. We're thrilled to be joined by Father Paul Coleman and Dr. Kathy Cummings. Welcome.
Thank you very much, JJ.
We had the pleasure of sharing a cohort with you last year in the Institute for Advanced Studies Teaching Lab Fellows program, in which you guys developed a course on global Catholicism, and now you're in the first running of it. We wondered if we could just start by having you tell us a little bit about the course and what you've learned so far and how it's going.
Well, the most important thing is we're still friends.
Yes.
We're halfway through, and seriously, we're having a lot of fun. We weren't sure. As you know, we spent a lot of time last year thinking through things, but you never know until you actually get into the classroom. And it's been a great first half of the semester.
It really has. We've found the students really responsive to the fact that we're there together and we interact. We haven't yet had any knockdown, drag-out arguments, but we're looking forward to that.
Yes, right.
Insofar as,
yeah.
I mean, one of the goals of the course is in some ways to recognize the gifts and challenges that come from looking at something like global Catholicism through different disciplinary lenses. And we're in different academic departments. So we have different academic trainings. And that's part of the richness of the course itself and also the hopes we had for what our students would gain from taking the course.
Yeah, can you give us an example of something in the class that you're approaching from different angles and how that's come up?
For sure. Like just this past Saturday, we took the class to Chicago to visit some ethnic parishes. And, the course covers lots of different possible ways that students can slot it into their own course requirements. So on the one hand, Professor Cummings, Kathy's so thoughtful and well-versed and able to explain thoughtfully how migration has shaped the Catholic experience in the United States. And the parishes we went to, each of them had gone through kind of cycles of different ethnic groups being the dominant one. And so it just is natural for her to start talking about that at the parish that's now Latino that used to be Irish and Polish. At the Chinese parish that used to be Italian, and at the parish that's now a Center for Vietnamese Catholicism that now also has an Eritrean Catholic community. So,
and for me, I'm trained as a historian of the United States. I teach in both the history department and the American Studies department, so we have a lot of American Studies majors in the class as well. And we started at the very beginning of Christianity, so the United States is pretty far down the thing. And although I've definitely tried in my own research and my work at the Cushwa Center for the Study of American Catholicism to situate that U.S. Catholic experience in a broader frame and more global, but it's been really interesting to do that and really to go back to early Christianity, which is not my area of expertise. So I've learned a lot. I've relied on Paul a lot, but I think we do complement each other so far. And even in class, we're able to bounce ideas off of each other sometimes. And I think that'll probably continue or become more pronounced the more we teach the class. Right now, when you're doing everything for the first time, it's just kind of an adventure.
Yeah, holding on for dear life.
Right, and it's such a vast topic.
Yeah.
The're so many different
We're doing
angles
the whole
we can
thing.
take.
Yeah, right. The whole globe.
Global Catholicism, right.
Yeah.
So we're a bit overwhelmed at times figuring out how to fit all we want to say into the classes we have. A lot is on the cutting room floor in the planning. And that we grieve that.
Yeah.
A student came by today to talk about, are we going to be able to talk much about the Native American Catholic experience in the United States? Yeah. And I said, well, we can talk some about that, but it's not, we didn't choose a set of readings to address that particularly.
We talked about Katsiri Tekakwitha a little bit.
We did.
And
the North American martyrs.
And students gave presentations. We had wonderful group student presentations,
Sure.
which is something I learned from Paul. I guess I don't know if I was a little nervous about that because it was giving students so much, it was expecting so much of them. And they rose to the occasion in this fabulous way.
They really did, yeah.
And so, I've learned to be a little more daring in assignments, I think, through collaborating with Paul.
Yeah,
and then
fun.
it's also like different the further you go down. So when you say like Native Americans kind of got left on the cutting room floor, But then there's also so many differences in that experience across the American continent, you know, in terms of what that looks like. You would have to go into really
Right.
meticulous differentiation to get.
South Dakota, New Mexico, the Great Lakes.
Yeah, I was thinking California, you know, Texas, no, you know, yeah.
Right.
Florida.
St.
Florida.
Augustine, yeah.
Right.
Just
Same.
really, and those are all like at least Spanish-speaking places,
Right.
but they're all still
we
really
did
different.
we did talk about St. Augustine today because we were talking about missionaries to the Americas in the early modern period and the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina, which is a really important slave rebellion in
Yeah.
U.S. history. But what the textbooks wouldn't necessarily mention is that there was a lot of Catholic rituals and symbols in that, and these were the freedom fighters were from the Kingdom of the Congo and had been Catholic
Catholic
for
kingdom. Wow.
generations.
Sure.
And they were trying to get to the Spanish colony of St. Augustine, where they could have won their freedom. So
Right.
that was really part of it. But they planned it on September 8th, the birthday of Mary, and Mary was really important to them, and carried Marian symbols and referenced Mary in their journey. So, but I mean, we did that for
1739.
1739.
Wow.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
we did that for about 5 minutes. I mean, this
Yeah,
is
right.
you could rate. So that's part of it. We move pretty fast, but yeah, I think we're still able to get some depth, and I think we have some really good readings too. And the students do them. We give these quizzes. These,
We've taken attendance basically with reading quizzes.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Every class, they just
and they're easy quizzes if you've done the reading, but they have.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So-
we haven't. We're going to be looking at the midterms soon, so we'll know more once we've looked at them. Fingers crossed. So, yeah, it's been really fun.
Why is it so important to be teaching this class now to undergrads at Notre Dame, would you say?
So many reasons.
So many reasons. I think immediately one of the books we read was Life by Pope Francis, which is his autobiography, and we had read it last spring. It's relatively new, and we thought it would work well, and it did. We read it at the beginning of the semester, and it really provided a wonderful lens for the students to think about the global church through the first pope from the Americas, someone who has a lot of experience leading the church in Argentina and has shaped the papacy in really profound ways for the last 12 years. And so that's been really, really timely and really poignant. What would you
Yeah,
say?
and I would say even his current illness and hospitalization becomes something they can connect to. And it's very timely because his personal story also explains his particular interest in migrants and refugees.
Sure.
So because his parents were migrants and he's long had a feeling for the people who come from far away to a new place, bringing their faith, bringing their experiences. So in all sorts of ways, this is a really important time. On our midterm, one of the essay questions that the students could ask was, we're in the United States, which we tend to have a capacity to think of ourselves as the center of the world, but we're like, 60 million of the world's 1 billion Catholics. So we're not the center of the Catholic Church. So what have you learned in this class that kind of has helped you think about the nature of global Catholicism in light of your situatedness where you are, as well as other things we've encountered in the class? So that's really important for us.
One of the things we mentioned to them right at the beginning was that, and I'd say most are Catholic themselves, and
Probably
that
75%.
yeah, but that as students at the University of Notre Dame, they are part of the story of global Catholicism, no matter what their own relationship, their personal faith is, or their relationship to the church, because Notre Dame is a big part of that and seeking to become a bigger part of the global church. So, and I think that's a point we tried to get across, and it does change your perspective when you look at Catholicism from the perspective of Nigeria, as we did through reading a novel by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Purple Hibiscus. That was actually, was that the first book we
First
read?
book we
yeah,
read.
then we read Life. So we started with a Nigerian Catholic woman, then we went to the Pope. It was really, it was really
Yeah.
great.
It's been really a wonderful experience. A lot of fun. A lot of work. Building a new class is a lot
Sure.
of work.
We don't
Right.
have to tell you guys.
No.
that.
Right?
Yeah.
And
What?
working together is
It's so much fun.
it's fun
Yeah.
and it's challenging.
And it's challenging,
yeah. And time-wise and energy-wise.
Yeah.
It
Yes,
helps you
absolutely.
be very thoughtful about things that you would normally take for granted. Like you
Yeah.
have to think
Yes.
about things very,
Yes.
very carefully. One of the places that global Christianity, global spread of the faith comes up in Rhythms of Faith is that we talk a lot about the dynamics between local congregational music that reflects a specific place. And if we're thinking, since you've brought migration to the surface, that might be music that doesn't originate from the place where you're worshiping. Maybe it's been brought to that place, like this Eritrean community in Chicago, for example. And then what we think of as like, European sacred music and the centralized understanding of the church. So, how would you help our students who are thinking about local and universal dimensions of what it means to be Catholic? How would you help them think that through so that we can apply that to music and to liturgy?
What a
It's
good
an easy
Yeah, that's a
question.
good-
Yeah, right.
I'll ask you the hard ones after.
Total
the
softball, yeah.
yeah.
Well, we have talked about the layering too, in just in this recent visit to Chicago, but in other ways as well, where a church, one of the churches visits started out in an Irish neighborhood and is now primarily made up of Latinos. We went to a Chinese Catholic church that started out as an Italian parish, and the Italians still come back to parade an 800-pound statue of Our Lady through
Wow.
the streets on Mary's birthday, actually. So we talk about it as each new group is adding something and bringing their own traditions, whether that be music, which we don't actually know a lot about and don't talk about, but language, certainly, different Marian devotions. We have one student who was walking around taking pictures all day on Saturday, and Our Lady of Guadalupe was in every single church we visited, whether that was that was Chinese or Eritrean or Latino, and he was sending pictures to his mom, and that was really. And I said, "What did your mom think?" And he said, "She was just happy I was in a church."
Which we were glad he was in a church too. And, it was great.
Yeah.
I would say we do hope to think about the richness of liturgical music, but it's hard for us to make that a focus. Part of me thinks that in some ways the most important thing is almost witnessing ritual behavior that would be shaped by particular melody and or rhythm, particularly rhythm. I mean, as an Africanist, someone who is kind of trained in studying African Christianity, I'm just mindful of the ways drums really drive liturgy.
Yeah.
And I'm also mindful of a missionary history that was very wary of drums being used in liturgies. And some of the most ardent early converts were themselves the people who didn't want to bring the drums in because they were wary of the connotations.
Right.
There's an odd sort of fascination and or rejection and or acceptance of something like that into the liturgy in the history that still sometimes shapes contemporary piety and liturgical practice. Some of the most intensely Catholic places in Eastern Africa, which I study, are places that are reluctant to bring the drums in
Yeah.
because the drums bespeak a certain kind of earlier religiosity.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that differed a lot in Native American communities as well, whether and what kind of drumming was permitted. So that's our name too.
Yeah. It's
Right.
one of the things I think the students are particularly interested in too, is the elements of enculturation that both distance them maybe from what their current experience is of their faith or their time in liturgical worship versus the ways in which it might be able to translate the sort of ineffable experience of liturgy to something that's familiar to them through a song that they know, for example. So I am curious just how you've seen this type of thing, especially in the African context, with drums and rhythms especially. Like, what are some ways that you've seen it done really well or successfully?
Many, I would say, what it best happens when people are a couple generations in and their Christian identity is really consolidated. And then you get someone who's a skilled musician who can not just sort of translate a European hymn into an African language, but transpose it
Right.
into a new sort of idiom, and is someone who's been steeped in the scriptures and the liturgical life of the church for a generation or two. So I've been lucky enough to be in places which do have that kind of depth. And that's where the liturgical musical creativity can really happen. It becomes natural rather than sort of imposed by a missionary who, with the best of intentions, wants to make things, adaptable, but
Right.
she or he is not going to be someone who's an insider of that culture.
Right.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so it's that embedded knowledge that really kind of helps it come to life.
right. And in our class, in some ways, one of the things we've been brushing around, and we hope to deal with it more directly in the second half of the semester, is the distinction between something that we might call syncretism, which is like a 10-letter, 4-letter word in theology.
Yeah.
Like it's not a good thing in general, and enculturation, which does tend to be celebrated, but in practice, it's very hard to distinguish those two
Right.
one from another.
Yeah, we
What's
did a whole.
syncretism for somebody is
It's hard
enculturation
for some people
another.
to distinguish them.
Yeah.
And other people are very ready to make distinctions.
right, exactly. Yeah. There was a great example of this, not in music, but in the Chinese church we visited, and a student noted this in a question just in today. There was a table that was there in the church to venerate the ancestors. And this is something that the early Jesuit missionaries in the early modern period tried to adapt and felt like the church should be able to welcome this. The church ended up condemning those Chinese rites, but they were reversed in 1939. The Catholic Church then kind of accepted. So this church is able to have that be a kind of a side altar.
Huh.
It was very easy to see it and quite interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. So when we're talking about, this sort of global central and the global spread of the church, I also was curious about your experiences of the synod. Synodality is something we work with a lot in Rhythms of Faith. And I think, kind of what are your thoughts on synodality and its importance for the church, for global Catholicism?
I think you happened to be in
Well,
Rome
we were
during
there.
the
Yeah,
synod,
That's
right?
why I said you were
Yes,
there. We
yeah.
were jealous. That's why I remember.
Yeah, it was. We were not delegates to the synod, but we were privileged to be invited to a prayer service that was held. Actually, a prayer service for migrants and refugees that was held in St. Peter's Square on one of the evenings, and it was really just us and the synod delegates mostly, and that was really moving. I had written a lot, talked about Pope Francis and migrants, but to be with him in that square next to the sculpture of migrants and having him pray, and he preached on the Good Samaritan, and it was incredibly moving. And then we were able to talk to many of the synod delegates. This was a year ago, over a year ago, the first meeting, and they had a lot of hope and felt very empowered by the conversations that they were having, and this was pretty much in the middle of it. So I think it's changed the way we think of the church. A lot of people think of the church. A church that listens isn't something that we've always conceptualized. So,
Yeah, can you give us a little historical context on that, maybe?
on the synod?
Within you said it's a change for the church, how we think about church.
Yeah, it's a move toward, and even some of our students would think of the church as just a very hierarchical thing. One of the things I do, not necessarily in this class yet, but in other classes, the church teaches is always, people say that to justify it. Well, what do you mean by the church? Is it a papal document? Is it a bishop? Is it your pastor? Is it somebody? What do we mean by that? And I don't think that many Catholics are thinking about what the people say and think as being heard at the top. And so the whole synodal process, I think, was a departure from just the way it was conducted. I was really impressed with the surveys and the meetings that were sent, and from the people that were reading them, and they were taking it seriously. I think some people expected a lot more, like a lot of immediate change, like the people want this and this is what's going to happen,
right.
and that's not what it was ever about.
Sure.
But I do think it's different. I mean, it's in a line with what's happened since the Second Vatican Council, but I think this has pushed it quite a bit, and I think it's going to continue, into the next pontificate.
Yeah.
what I'm gathering from how Pope Francis thinks about it is he would really like to see the people who participated in the synod become leaven in the local churches they come from, so that the way they foster discernment in their dioceses and or universities and or religious communities, that leaven would kind of develop a way of listening to the Spirit together that's hard to affect, and there probably isn't going to be one model
Right.
of how that happens.
No.
How you listen to the Holy Spirit together, interpreting the signs of the times, reading the tradition, the scriptures, making good sense of the reason we've been given, and the findings of social science, humanities, physical science, etc., to kind of discern how the Spirit's calling us forward.
I think that's really helpful, and I think too, discernment. It's not about the people saying one thing and the church listening. It's about, as you say, discerning together. And that is so important to him as a Jesuit. But you can see the way his whole life really, and especially just reading this book, but interior discernment guides his leadership approach, his style, and I think the Synod is a collective discernment in a way that hasn't really been modeled before effectively.
Sure.
I mean, and you can find exceptions, right? Certain bishops, certain religious leaders have been pretty good at figuring out in local circumstances that were appropriate for that place to develop processes. But I think there are going to be a lot of them that evolve. And the danger would be to kind of prematurely foreclose possibility because we feel like questions are settled. I think I think Pope Francis feels like, well, the Spirit's alive.
Yeah.
Who knows what certain questions are settled. We have creeds and we have assumptions, but I just
Not as much as is settled
Sometimes-
as people think is settled.
right.
People would
Yeah.
like to think that things are settled.
Yeah.
often.
And that's behind the church teaches. The church
Yeah,
says that.
That's
Well,
right.
There's
a lot
all
of
sort of
anxiety
gradations.
in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I think is striking about Pope Francis is how much he's driven by hope and not by anxiety.
I think that's right. He trusts. He wants to trust, and I think he gets wounded.
Yeah.
Even the project of synodality is almost preposterous.
Yeah.
And in the context of your course on global Catholicism, you're talking about the animation of the concept of synodality in an infinite number of ways,
Yeah.
and just the sort of courage to unleash that and enable it in the world could only come out of a posture of hope.
Yeah. Who has the guts to
Right.
start a process they can't control?
Yeah, because you risk it going in a direction you can't have foreseen and which might disappoint you,
Yeah. Yeah.
or frustrate you, or even anger you.
Yeah. Or harm you.
Yeah, let's hope not.
Yeah.
But he's, and we're just.
He also has a sense of humor about the whole thing.
Right.
Too. Remember
Yeah.
the part in his book where he talked about, and now we're talking about his pneumonia in his lungs, but he had an upper lobe of his lung removed as a young man and was very sick. And he said one time, "I almost died, and perhaps some people would have been happier today if I had." I mean, he's just funny. I mean, he knows that.
Yeah.
I just I think he's.
He is humorous.
He's really
Great.
and has this freedom from fear that I also think I think his courage is rooted also, like his discernment in Saint Ignatius and in Jesuit spirituality.
That's right.
Yeah, that's where I think it comes
Yeah,
from.
finding God in all things,
Yeah.
even disappointment. For me, the most moving part of the memoir, which is kind of the first of two, Hope has come out since.
It's called Hope. Yeah,
That
yeah,
was-
right.
yeah.
But Life, which is an interview with a journalist, the most moving part was when he was, after he'd been provincial and after he'd studied some in Germany and came back to Argentina, where he was really helping, he was almost put in a position that he was very overqualified for, helping his fellow Jesuits in medical care. And how he lived for 2 years. He said it was hard because I just didn't know why this was happening to me. He said I was trusting and I was doing. He said it was a beautiful experience for me to give this tender care to my brothers.
Sure.
That and he was able to do other kinds of things as a priest and confessor. But he knew that he was overqualified for this kind of position, and he couldn't but interpret as something like a sidelining by certain people in the Argentine Jesuit community.
I'm curious from each of your disciplinary perspectives, from the perspective of the history of American Catholicism and the African, especially the East African communities that you've studied closely. Like, what are the sort of unique liturgical gifts that they have offered to the global church in your estimation?
Well, I think in the United States, the incredible diversity from the beginning, different ethnic groups mixing. I mean, we've already talked about the layering of the various ethnic groups, but I think even in terms of language, I mean, in the colonial, in the British colonies, the first Bishop John Carroll started to have Mass in English because of the anti-Catholicism that was present. And then the vernacular, Mass in the vernacular, it was so important, or at least devotions in the vernacular in the ethnic parishes in the 19th century. So I think in terms of that flexibility in the United States, ethnic Catholic groups were always bumping up against people who shared their religion, but practiced it very differently. And I think that it's just a wonderful mosaic, I think, of and made it very complex. So that's one thing I'd say.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I have moved back and forth between the church in the United States and the church in Eastern Africa, and I'm grateful for kind of having some bit of a home in both, because things delight me in both places and frustrate me in both places. I do think there's palpable joy in Eastern Africa liturgical celebrations that are tricky to replicate here, although sometimes they happen. One way is to tell a story, I really appreciate the liturgies here at Notre Dame. So after the Easter Vigil, when I've gone to the Easter Vigil, for instance, at the Sacred Heart Basilica or another church in South Bend, afterwards, people will be having some sort of a celebration. Wasn't that a beautiful liturgy? The psalmist really did a beautiful job. That was a good homily. Wow, the music was great. But if you're in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dandora, where I lived as a seminarian, kind of a slum, after the Easter Vigil, people are like, Jesus is risen. Jesus is risen. Like that, it's a different, palpable kind of celebration, right? It's just different. Those are differences.
Right.
That unrestrained, expressiveness is something that you value. That it's really hard to do here. It's you can't just be like, well, I myself am going to have this unrestrained celebration without the support of a community that also lives that way, right?
And it's one of the values of having children, right? Because they sometimes lead us.
They're quite unrestrained.
So that they can be
right,
and good, bad, distracting, delighting. So those would be a couple things I think about.
That's cool.
We like to finish every episode with the same question, which is, if you were an animal, which would you be? Very simple, but also very telling. So no pressure.
I'd be a dolphin.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I love to swim in the ocean.
I
love to frolic in the ocean, really, not so much swim. And I also, I'm not an expert on dolphins but I know that they're very social and they really appreciate strong bonds. And so I'd like to think that that's the kind of animal I would be.
Nice.
Love it.
That's a really hard
We
question.
were all in a pod together last year.
That's right. We had our little dolphin pod.
Yeah, we were in
our little office over there.
That was legend.
Flanner Hall. That's a really hard one. I've been very intrigued. There was a book about the consciousness of octopus, the octopi. And it struck me that their consciousness is according to this book, so complicated that there was something about reaching into that consciousness that appealed to me. And I didn't read the whole book, but just parts of it.
Yeah.
I suppose it's a longing to understand the experience of another person,
Yeah.
finding them always utterly mysterious the more I get to know them.
Sure.
Even though I'm always tempted to like put the people in a box like all of us are because we have to classify. But I suppose reading that or learning about how complicated and different octopus consciousness might be made me just want to appreciate that for a minute.
Octopus for a day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're our first two ocean creatures.
Yeah, right.
Oh, we're both ocean creatures.
Yeah.
That's fun.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful.
All right.
Well, we're grateful, guys. Thank you for joining us.
We are
today.
very grateful. Really good to
This
meet
was
you.
fun.
Really good to
Yeah.
reconnect.
This
Yeah.
was really fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this. Thanks for people participating in the podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for joining us on another episode of the Rhythms of Faith.